friends? Here we are once again with another dividend portfolio review video. And just as a reminder, there are timestamps down below because again, this is going to be a little bit raw, a little bit podcasty, but we're going to show up here every 2 weeks despite the slower pace of funding this dividend portfolio, because that is the goal, right, friends? To fund our dividend portfolio, and over time we'll build up that financial wealth through hopefully various pillars, I guess we can say, but one of the main ones is going to be our dividend portfolio. Maybe eventually some of us will branch off into real estate, maybe other forms as well, maybe more modern forms like cryptocurrency or just individual stock holdings, trying to take a more growth approach, or maybe through your career, just trying to continue to increase your income or your yearly salary. I mean, we all have our own goals, but something brings us all together here, which is dividends. And it's not something that I want to take lightly, because I know sometimes it's hard to relate to people, and I totally get it. Dividend investors aren't, I guess, far too common out in the open. I mean, in my inner circle, which is quite small, I'm the only person I know that, is dividend investing. A lot of people invest with, some holdings being dividends, or I guess paying out dividends. But to be a strict dividend investor with the dividend portfolio specifically, with this idea to one day be grown to pay you out a substantial passive income in dividends, it's not super common. I mean, I'd be interested to hear your experience. Other people other than yourself that invest in this way. And especially at my current age, at 27, it's not very common. Most people like to invest, in the Teslas and the Apples, Nvidias, all these other growth stocks. And I totally get it. That is a strategy. This dividend portfolio took me since the origination of, starting it in the year 2020 up until now, for it to be pretty, I guess, substantial. It's not significant, but it is noticeable now. And once again, you'll see an update towards the end of the video. But as you can see, friends, I have 2 other questions or topics for this video. And like I mentioned, towards the end, we'll go through the portfolio review. But as far as this first topic, friends, have I ever thought of giving up dividend investing? That's a good question. I know if you're a dividend investor, you do realize that this is a very long game, and doubt will always kind of creep in every now and then. Sometimes I forget, how quick it is to make money when you're not a dividend investor. You can put this money into, some real estate and make a quicker return. You can invest into the Tesla, at the right time, for example, and make a way quicker return. And there's risk with everything. There's still even risk with dividend investing, even though it may not feel like it sometimes, because it's a slower, steadier, I guess more boring way to invest. But you could still get cooked pretty good and may not even realize it because it's happening slowly over time. So you still got to be careful. But through that, friends, I've had my moments. I've had my moments of doubt. I've been discouraged. There have been times where I'm like, I don't know if I should stay here. Like, I can make money quicker, way quicker in other areas. I've had my thoughts of selling my dividend portfolio and using it, as a down payment for a rental property and getting a quicker return. Owning some real estate, owning something physically. Even though owning stocks can be, physical, but it's not like a property that you can drive by, go into, hand someone the keys, and just start collecting some rent. So I've had my thoughts. I continually have them from time to time. And, I always remind myself that let me just stick to this course because this was my plan from the start. And I'm already 2.5 years in. I'm almost going to be 3 years in about another 1 to 2 months. And I tell myself I've come a long way. And in just a short amount of time, for some people it can be long, but 2-3 years as a dividend investor is a short amount of time. I've already seen results I already make about $2,000 a year in dividends every year, and my portfolio is not something I ever have to really worry about, which that alone, that component, goes a long way. I remember before I was a dividend investor, I was investing in penny stocks, which, I'll roll my eyes at too, and then growth stocks. And I was always, thinking about my portfolio, my holdings, worrying about the news, what's the news today and how's that going to affect my position. And I was just living a different lifestyle. Now that I'm a dividend investor, I very rarely ever think about that. I have a Seeking Alpha account, and if you have, it set up right, maybe I'll show you guys at some point. But if you just have the companies in there, you sign up for their email newsletters, and into your email box, you're going to get all this news. It'll tell you when they have a dividend increase, if they're going to stay the same, if they have any company news. And you just kind of go through your emails and you're like, oh, okay. And oftentimes it's pretty mundane, just standard status quo stuff, especially if you have blue chip companies that you're holding. Nothing really interesting ever happens. I mean, that's why they say it's a boring, holding. I mean, like Smucker, what can happen? They sell peanut butter, jelly. I think they even sell some dog food. Like what's the worst thing that can happen? We're people, we need food. We have animals, they need food. It's just status quo stuff. It's like Procter and Gamble. Like, people need to wash their clothes. They need, Tide. So it's just standard status quo stuff. So I always think the hardest part, and the thing that always leads me into every now and then wanting to give up on this strategy, is this idea that it's boring. So as long as you can continue to hold off and continue through this mundane process of very slowly building a dividend portfolio over time, you'll be okay. And it's supposed to be boring, but I've had my thoughts, I've had my doubts. One of the ways that I actually approach it when this thought happens is I recognize it, but I also tell myself that this is the game plan. I knew it was going to be slow, and rather than pivot and change this strategy, I'm adding to it. So I'll continue to be a dividend investor, right? That's my strategy. And I'll continue it forward, continuing to funnel it, continuing to water it. And then over time, as I slowly also increase my income, just in general, now I'll start to funnel, money into maybe a cash reserve for real estate, and then not change my initial strategy of being a dividend investor, but now adding an additional, stream eventually of passive income through real estate, trying to be either a landlord or, get a rental property management company. But instead of changing, now I add. And it's that slight difference that I think actually matters a lot. And sometimes maybe our income doesn't allow us to do that. And at that point, you have a couple choices. You can sell a chunk of your dividend portfolio and dip into real estate, or, really double down and try to improve on yourself. And if you do that, it's harder, but you can increase your income, and now you can actually have two. You can have your cake and you can eat it too. It's harder, but it's possible. And honestly, friends, we should all be trying to increase our income anyways, especially in today's time. Nothing is ever going to be cheaper. Don't look at it that way. Don't wait expecting things to be cheaper. You should be working on ways to increasing your income instead. I think that's an easier and far better solution, because we're living in some odd times right now. And then, friends, for the second one, the 3 stages of financial success. And this one isn't too complicated, so I'm going to simplify it, as best that I can. But the 3 stages of financial success in this life, the first one is the basic at the bottom, and that's survival mode. Living in survival mode. And I'm going to go over these, after I kind of tell you what they are. So the first one's survival mode. The next one's the living phase. And then the third one is the thriving phase. These are the 3 stages of financial success that I view. And just to tell you right off the bat, I'm currently in the living phase, and I'll explain. And then maybe you can decide which phase you're actually in. So let's start with the surviving phase. The surviving phase is the phase where you're pretty much living paycheck to paycheck. You're living off a lot of debt, a lot of credit cards. You're likely working a job you're not fully proud of, pretty much given to you out of, circumstance or convenience. Maybe it's the only job you can actually hold at the moment. Things aren't going very well for you. It's not a life that you're very proud of. You are surviving. How to pay the next bill, how to get the next meal, living off a lot of credit cards, not being able to really gain traction in life in general. You're likely not living in an environment you're proud of, in a home that you can truly enjoy. And if you have kids, this is all even harder, right? Trying to survive, not just for yourself, but in your family unit. And if you look around, friends, there's a lot of the world, and I'm just going to keep it to America here in our culture. There's a lot of people in the surviving phase. You're finding yourself in somewhat of a black hole, and it's hard to gain traction to improve your position. But you're living off handouts. You're living paycheck to paycheck. You don't have the money you need to truly live a life that you want and a life that you'd be proud of. That job isn't the one you want, and everything is kind of going against you. And financially, you are struggling. Maybe you're trying to go back to school at the same time that you're working and you just can't gain traction. Maybe you're a single parent as well and you're trying to gain traction. And it's hard. And you see a lot of people in this stage. And one of the most damaging things about being in the survival phase is that people either start there or they start in the living phase and fall into the surviving phase because either they didn't plan right or life comes. And it happens sometimes, and it knocks us down. But one of the hard things about being in the survival phase is that the longer that you're in this phase, the easier it is to get stuck in it and never get out. And oftentimes when you see it, you see that actually happen. You see people fall into the survival phase and not get out, or you see people start in the survival phase and mentally not believe that there's anything more to it, that this is just going to be their life. They saw their parents do it. Now they're in it. And it's just part of it. They're not meant to succeed. And it does become a mindset. It does become this type of ceiling, this cap that we place on ourselves. And it's very easy. The small town that I grew up in, there's a lot of people in the survival phase. Very low income, very small homes that people aren't proud to have. The neighborhood suffered because of it, crime, things like that. And it was just a mindset, a small town mindset, like you're not supposed to get out. So one of the best things I did was actually get out of that hometown, despite how hard it was. And I didn't come out with any friends. Very few people actually do become successful out of that town. And it's hard because once you're in it, you're living it day by day. And that's just one example of it, but there's multiple. But this first phase is called survival, friends. You're just trying to survive. This next phase is now the living phase. And I would actually say the majority of people that you see around you are actually in this phase, the living phase. You have a slightly higher income now. You can technically live a life that you're more proud of. Maybe you're not necessarily now living paycheck to paycheck. You make more money, but you're also spending enough money to kind of keep you in this kind of state of limbo where you can't fully thrive and you're not making enough to kind of be down in the survival phase, but just enough to kind of be comfortable. So you're now comfortable, with the money you make, the money you spend. You can go on vacations every now and then. You live in a slightly better home. You're just living your life. It's a mundane process. You clock in, clock out at work. You're not really trying to improve your position. Now you're just living. It's almost like a stagnated phase, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like I said, most people are in this phase. You're just okay with where you are. You're kind of average in the sense of, wealth. And I would say for the most part at this point in time, I am in this living phase because I don't make a substantial amount of money where you can tell that I'm winning. which is something that's required when you make it to the thriving phase. And we'll talk about it. But in the living phase, you're comfortable, and there's really nothing else, other than that. Like, as long as you can kind of go about your way in life, you probably know you're in the living phase. You don't worry too much about money, and you're okay overall. You got a pretty good gig, but you're still paying your bills on time, and you get a little extra money to go on vacations and save up a little bit, finally buy your home, and you're just kind of here, in the living phase. And like I said about the survival phase, when you're in the living phase, if you don't play your cards right, you can dip back below and go into the survival phase. But the idea is, hopefully when you do fall, you only fall for a little bit and you'll come right back into the living phase again. But in the living phase, friends, one of the things is, if you play your cards right, if you do everything right, over time things will stack up, and eventually you'll make more money, you'll build your wealth, you'll make smart financial decisions as you kind of have your feet under yourself and you're able to make these decisions, right? Because you're not surviving, you're now comfortable. If eventually you continue to do the right things, you'll find yourself in the thriving phase. And like I said, one key indicator of being in the thriving phase is you can tell that these people are winning in life. You could just tell. Their car is different, their house is different, the way they carry themselves is different. Maybe their position in their career ladder is different, and their career in general. Maybe they're a business owner and they're just rocking and rolling. That is the thriving phase. Money is no longer an issue. You have a good financial foundation of investments. You probably own a lot more of your time than you did before. You're making a lot of decisions that are based on yourself and not, a different set of rules or society as a whole. When you're thriving, you can just tell, friends. And oftentimes this happens if you do things right. If you do the living phase right, you can end up in the thriving phase. And these are easy to tell. You can just tell who's thriving in life. You can tell. You can tell when the person walks in the room. You could tell by speaking to them. Some people fake it though, so you do got to be careful. Some people have the nice car and the nice house. They carry themselves a certain way, and it's all fake. So you do got to be careful. They're drowning in debt. They're not really thriving. They're tethered to the chain, probably in the living phase, if not even worse, right? Faking it. So you do got to be careful. But those are pretty much the three stages, friends. Surviving, living, thriving. I spent less time on thriving because, that one's harder to get to. It's harder to get to, and it's not as common, but it is quite easy to tell whenever you see someone in it. Money's not an issue. You can go on vacations more often. You own more of your time. You could just tell, period, when someone's thriving. I mean, there's tiers in this life, and you know it. There's tiers of neighborhoods. There's tiers of transportation. There's tiers of vacations. There's tiers of restaurants you can go to. You can tell. At the top tier of all those things is thriving. That is thriving. Early retirement, you could say, is probably thriving as well. You could tell. But that's going to be it, friends, for this podcasty section. Let's now make our way into the portfolio update review. So here we are, friends. Slow and steady is the name of the game. We are now at $66,430.89. And this is with a return all time of 18.06% and a total gain of $6,281. And if we take a closer look here, this is always my favorite. I always love seeing this, especially as a dividend investor, and you should too, in your portfolio. But market gain is $3,000. Earned dividends is $3,200. Together it's awesome, right? $6,000. But just know, my earned dividends mark is higher than my market gain. This is what being a dividend investor is about, because it doesn't matter how the markets are necessarily doing, and they've been good, but they could be a lot better, or worse. But regardless, our earned dividends continues to pile up over time, and it does help with the overall return of the portfolio. So just know if I was just a growth investor, I mean, maybe I'd have more than 18% or so or whatever, but my market gain would only be $3,000 and I wouldn't have these earned dividends. I'd be at $63,000 instead of $66,000. So just keep that in mind. Slow and steady. And let's see, just to see potentially which ones are best return at this time. Looks like it continues to be energy sector, followed by tech, and then consumer discretionary. And then now once we start going into the reds, we have materials, healthcare, communications. And real estate is actually my biggest hit. And I'm not too surprised because it does kind of coincide with what's happening in the day-to-day. If you follow the housing market, if you are a frequent explorer of Zillow, for example, you can tell that, as opposed to maybe a year ago, a couple months ago, even 6 months or so, the housing market, every time you look, every day would be higher, as opposed to now you're starting to see a lot more reduced prices in housing, and a lot of houses are actually staying on the market a lot longer. So it does coincide, minus 15%, with the housing market or the housing sector. And just to always be transparent, I still continue to funnel my dividend portfolio $100 every single week. Before, if you've been here for a while, I used to do $500 every single week, or about $2,000 every month, which is an amazing pace, to be honest. And that's where I made a lot of my, initial, that's where I initially got my traction, I guess I can say. And that's what ultimately helped me get to this size so quickly, in about 2.5 years. But $100 is going to be my continual funnel for now because, part of my other strategy is to create a cash reserve for real estate. And eventually, not pivot, but eventually add to, my investments. Have my dividend portfolio, have my real estate portfolio. If I continue with the state, continue to, build up my pension in the background, and through my employer, also continue to try to increase my income. Those are my strategies, moving forward. But as you can see here, I do have multiple dividend payouts. I have Verizon of $12.95, for example. I also have JP Morgan Chase of $12.23. And I have American Tower Core of 11. And all these green ones here are dividend payouts. We can go to the next page. Again, my $100 deposits are always here, and then more dividend payouts at 6 property, $15 for example. And this is always the fun part. I don't come in here as often as I used to. DLR $18 here for example. But it is nice to kind of come back and look from time to time. And just to show you my holdings, you can see I do have 51 positions overall, with the cost basis of $63,000. My value currently is $66,000, and unrealized gain is about $3,000. And I guess just to check out the funding history. So as you can see, 2021 I hit my mark of $500 every week, and then in 2022 is actually when I started to change it a little. And then as you can see, so far this year, going at $100 every single week, it's a lot slower of a pace, which is leading to a lot slower of a frequency to upload these dividend videos as well. Because I feel like 2 weeks is probably the good amount, in between. That gives you still a little bit of updates on the portfolio itself, as opposed to the fast pace, that we were doing before. I'll continue to be here every 2 weeks. In another 2 weeks, I'll probably have another style video as similar to this one. And then eventually, in the month of May, we will have our dividend portfolio review where I do show you how much I actually make in dividends. But just know, friends, this life will always be yours. And I'll continue to be here, continue to show up. And just know, regardless if I show up here every single week, I'm still a dividend investor, and I'm still continuing to try to improve my position in this life, as I think we all should, and as I feel we all are capable of. I'll see you then, friends. Until then, take care.